Hey guys, my name's Michael and today I want to teach you all about bar chords. Okay, so if you've never seen a bar chord before, they're basically this kind of chord shaped thing that we can move around the guitar. And because we don't have any open strings, it's kind of like the opposite of an open chord. But this allows us to move the same sort of hand shape around anywhere on the neck and make a full chord, a major chord or a minor chord on any fret. Even sort of the ones you may not be used to playing all that often, things like the flat and sharp notes, right? So we want to be able to build chords based on flats and sharps as well as the natural notes like C and F. We also want to be able to do a B flat minor or an E flat, right? Those kind of chords as well, okay? So being able to move all of the notes together, right? Because we have no open strings, all we have to do is move our entire hand shape anywhere across the fretboard, and we should be able to essentially make a major chord or a minor chord from any root note that way. Okay, so it is important moving forward with this that you have a pretty firm grasp on where the notes are, right? Your root notes for your chords. Otherwise, you're going to feel sort of lost. You may know how to play bar chords, but you won't know which ones to use. Okay, so if you haven't already done so, go refresh your memory on the order of the notes on the fretboard, at least on the first two strings. Okay, you don't have to necessarily know every single note across the entire fretboard, but it's helpful to at least know the common notes on the first two strings and then kind of be able to sort of take a minute and think about how to fill in the gaps, right? The flats and sharps and stuff in between the ones we're used to playing. Okay, and I do have a video on this, so if you need a quick refresher, go check out that video, come back here, and we'll work on our bar chords together. Okay, so moving forward, I'm going to show you there are pretty much 4 bar chords that we need to know. There's a major and a minor, and there's also this same variation, major and minor, where our root note is on either the 5th string, which is the A string, or the 6th string, which is the E string. Okay, so sometimes we refer to these as root 6 or root 5. And that just means our first finger or our lowest note is playing the root note of our chord on either the A string, the 5th string, hence the name root 5, or the 6th string, which is the low E string, root 6. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to you. I think as we move on and we just start practicing these chords, I will name them out loud, and hopefully it will start to sort of sink in what I'm talking about. Okay, don't worry too much right now if you don't totally understand the whole root 6, root 5 thing. Essentially, though, we need to be able to place our root note, our lowest note that we start stacking the chord notes, the other tones in the chord on top of. We need to be able to place that on either the E string or the A string. Okay, that's essentially it. So I'll show you both versions in a second. Let's start with the low E string. We're going to together make an A bar chord, an A major, okay? And just as a reminder, anytime we just say the name of the chord, A or C or G, and we don't say major or minor after, you should assume that that means major, okay? A and A major are the same thing. And that's not even just true about bar chords, that's pretty much always true about every chord on every instrument, okay? If it's minor, we'll say minor every time, okay? So, A begins here on a single note, also called A. Okay, that's where we get the name of our chord from, is the fact that we're building a chord, a major chord, from a root note, a bass note, a sort of lowest fundamental main tone that is an A. And from here, we're going to build a major chord and start stacking other higher notes on top of our root note. Okay, so that's going to look like this. Okay, we start with our first finger on A, which is the 5th fret of the E string. Then we have our 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the A string. Then we add our pinky, or our 4th finger, to the 7th fret of the D string. Okay, and so far you might recognize this as just like a power chord. Okay, so for most of my students, I usually kind of start showing you power chords before I start showing you bar chords, because it's a great sort of introduction into how to play bar chords. Okay, but we need to add the rest of the strings. Okay, otherwise we just have an A5, not a real chord, not a true full chord. It doesn't have the major and minor tonality that we desperately need more of in our music these days. Okay, so moving on, we're going to take our 2nd finger and we're going to put it on the 6th fret of the G string. Okay, and this note here, by the way, is the note that gives this chord major or minor tonality. It's what we call the third, okay? And all chords, well, almost all chords, are made up of a note series we call the 1, the 3, and the 5, or the first, third, and fifth, okay? And the third of a chord is the one that makes it either major or minor. And I'll show you in a minute that when we go to change this note, even a little bit, it drastically changes the feel and the vibe of the chord, even though we may have the same root note. Okay? Alright, so to recap, we have 5, 7, 7, 6. Okay? And that is enough right there to make an A chord. Okay? And it does have the full major minor tonality and all of the notes we need for an A chord. And you could even just practice this for a while, just getting the hang of those 4 notes. Okay? However, we want to fill out our chord and make it sound rich and beautiful and powerful. So we're going to add in 2 more notes because we have the B string and the E string still that aren't doing anything at the moment. Okay, and this is where we get the term bar. Okay, we're going to bar those 2 strings also on the 5th fret. Okay, in addition to that low root note that we're doing on the low E. Okay, so you may be thinking, wow, I'm supposed to play 3 notes with 1 finger? Yes, exactly. Okay, that is a bar. A bar is any time you play more than 1 string with the same finger. Okay, and it's always across the same fret. Okay, so luckily you're never gonna bar across multiple frets or anything like that. I've never seen that. It's probably out there somewhere in the world of the large catalog of guitar songs. Okay, but 99.9999% of the time, the bar is gonna be across the same fret. Okay, so that should be a clue to you when you're working through this if you can't remember. Just remember that the bar really goes across all 6 strings, okay? And that's sort of where we get the term bar chord. Our fingers act as like a little bar that presses against the fretboard, okay? And a bar should be nice and straight. Right, see that? Playing all 6 strings on the 5th fret with 1 finger, the first finger, okay? And then in addition to that, I'm adding in the extra notes to get an A major chord. Okay, so the full bar chord would be 5, 7, 7, 6, 5, 5. And that sounds beautiful and wonderful, as you can tell. Love the sound of a good bar chord. In fact, there are lots of songs that are nothing but bar chords in a really kind of unique, awesome way. Okay. So, now we want to be able to take that same idea, but what if we wanted to make a minor chord, right? So we have a major chord, okay, but what if I wanted to make a minor chord, okay? Well, like I was saying before, this note that you're doing with your 2nd finger is the 3rd of the chord, which is the note that gives chords major or minor tonality or quality, okay? So, all we have to do to make it minor is find all of the 3rds in the chord, and in this particular configuration of notes, there's only the 1. That's the only one that is the 3rd of the chord. Okay, so we got to take all of the 3rds. In this case, we only have 1, and we need to lower them by a half step. Or on a guitar, that means lower them by the distance of 1 fret. Okay, so if I'm playing 6, okay, and I need to lower it a half step, that means instead of sounding like 6, it needs to be a 5. Okay, so how can I do that? Well, I'm already barring across all the strings with my 1st finger, so all I have to do is lift up and play that here in the bar with the 1st finger. Okay, and now I have a minor chord. Got that rich, dark sound to a minor chord that we like. Okay, so major and minor. Right, and you can hear how just moving that 1 note by 1 half step completely changes the flavor of the chord. Okay, now that we have our 2 sort of hand shapes for our bar chords, a major and a minor, we can start taking this on the run. Okay, so you can move this across any fret. Okay, if this note is an A, and that's our root note, then this is an A major. Okay, and this is an A minor. Okay, because they are both built on the same root note, which is A. Okay, that didn't change. What did change was the quality of the chord, whether it's major or minor. Okay, so we have two different sort of hand shapes for each one, depending on what we're going for. Okay, and now we can move our root notes and make the same shape depending on where we want to put our root notes. Okay, let's say we're playing a song, got A for a while, and then the root note the chord changes to a B minor. Okay, so I'm taking my root note and I'm going to move to a B. This note is a B. Okay, and I want a minor chord, so go to that. All right, the minor shape for B minor. And then the next chord is, say, D major. Okay, so I slide way up here to D, and I make the major bar chord shape with this finger here. And I get a D major. A, D minor, major, A. Right? There we go. Bar chords. You're doing it. Okay? Getting it. Now, you may notice that as the frets get closer together, as we move higher up the neck, it can be a little cumbersome or a little awkward to try and squeeze all of our fingers and stuff in there. And sometimes we're making a large distance from one chord to the next, especially at a high tempo. It can be difficult to shoot across the neck really fast. Okay, so sometimes instead of a horizontal movement between notes, right, left and right, we want to make a vertical movement up and down between notes. Okay, or chords in this case. So it's super helpful when we're playing songs to be able to, instead of jump up like 10 frets or whatever, to be able to just default by jumping to the next string, right? It's a much smaller gap. Okay, you're moving vertically rather than horizontally is a great way to reduce the amount that your hand has to move in order to change notes. So we need to be able to make these same chords, bar chords, major and minor chords on any root note on the A string as well. Okay, so the first two that we learned, our root notes are all on the E string. Okay, but what if we wanted to go from, I don't know, say a G major chord here up to an E instead of E minor, right? Instead of sliding way up there, okay, we want to just jump up to the next string where our root note is here, right? Much smaller distance to move, okay, and that's nice. So let's learn the same sort of idea, the technique of bar chords, but we're going to begin with our root notes on the A string. Okay, so we'll take it from the 5th fret like we were doing before, but now the 5th fret of the A string is a D. This note, single note here, is a D. So when we build our major and minor chords at first, they're going to be a D major and a D minor. Let's start with the minor shape because it will feel familiar. I'll show you why in a minute. Okay, so we're going to skip the E string. Should be nothing on that, right? And you can use your first finger on the 5th fret of the A string as your root note, and you can even use the pad of your finger to kind of play that bar. And then, right, so we're going to bar all the strings, really. Okay, except for the low E string. And you can even use the tip of your finger to mute it. Now, in addition to our bar across the 5th fret, starting from the A string, we're going to add our 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the D string, and our pinky on the 7th fret of the G string, okay, and then our 2nd finger on the 6th fret of the B string, okay, and then our high E string is played on the 5th fret with the bar of your 1st finger. Muted with the tip of your 1st finger. Okay, so we've got a D minor chord, bar chord, okay? So you may notice that this shape, the shape of our hand, is very familiar to that of the A major bar chord, right? And indeed, they are the same sort of shape, okay? But because we've changed our root note, where every single finger has moved up a string, right? Up this way. One string. We end up getting a minor chord. And that really has to do with the fact that the B string is not tuned the same way that the other strings are. The B string is tuned into a major 3rd from the other strings, whereas all the other strings are tuned in 4ths from each other. Okay? Don't worry about that for now. Just know that It's very confusing. It's just important to realize whether your root note is on the 5th string, what we call a root 5 bar chord, okay, so that you know you're playing a minor chord, or if your root note is on the 6th string, a root 6 bar chord, where that same shape will give you a major chord. Okay, major, minor, major, minor. Okay, all right, so how do we make a major chord where our root note is on the 5th string? Okay, the A string. Well, there's actually 2 great ways, and I'll show you sort of the way I like to do it first. Okay, it's essentially this. Okay, so just like before, when we had that 1/3 of the chord that moves by just 1 fret difference to give us major or minor tonality, same note as here when we make our root 5 minor bar chord. This is the 1/3 of the chord, but because it's already minor, we need to go the other direction to make it major. We need to raise this note by a 1/2 step or 1 fret in order to make it major. Okay, now you may be thinking, all right, so I'll just play it like this, right? And yeah, that does work, but it's very uncomfortable. So we tend to basically rearrange our fingers. We get that same order. It's the same stack of notes with this note raised up a 1/2 step to make it major, okay? But to do that, we play it with the pinky instead, okay? Just because it's a more comfortable configuration for our fingers, okay? So a root 5 major chord, starting on D, would be D, the 5th fret of the A string, okay? And then 2nd finger on the 7th fret of the D string, okay? Our 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the B string, and then our pinky on the 7th fret of the B string, and then our 1st finger barring on the high E string. All right, so those are our 4 bar chord shapes. We have root 6 major, root 6 minor, root 5 major, root 5 minor. All right, so as you move up the fretboard, the frets can get a little close together, and this shape, the root 5 major chord, can get a little tricky to do. So at some point you may decide you want to rearrange the fingers yet again, and actually we're going to do the bar here. So this finger, your 3rd finger, will do the bar, meaning playing more than 1 string with that same finger. All right. So like let's say we're playing 9. Our root note here on 9, which is an F sharp. If you wanted an F sharp major, okay, we do 9 and then 11, 11, 11, 9, and that can be kind of uncomfortable. So consider, instead of playing these 3 with different fingers, play them all with the same finger. Okay. The disadvantage to this is that there's really no way to get that high E string going with the bar very easily. It does kind of come with practice. If you can do it, great, but we're so high up the neck at this point anyways that we don't usually need such a high note on the top of the chord anyways. Okay, so this tends to work just fine. All right, so we have to recap, root 6, meaning our root note on the 6th string, a major shape and a minor shape. And we have our root note on the 5th string, a major shape and a minor shape, and then an alternate major chord shape for the root 5 major, just because it can be a little uncomfortable sometimes. Okay, and that's it. Just really familiarize yourself with those 4 shapes of those bar chords, okay, and where the root note is. It's important to know whether your root note is on the 5th string or the 6th string, okay? And then you need to kind of just know what root notes you're using if you want to start using these in songs. So go look up a song. I guarantee you if there's some sort of chord in it that doesn't have an open chord version, right, like say a B major, right? There's no way to play a B major without doing some sort of bar chord. You need to know that B is either here or here. So root 6 major give you a B major, or root 5 major gives you a B major, right? And then you can work it in your song. That's it for today. Have fun with that. Feel free to shoot me a message or drop me a line if you have any questions. I'm always here to help. I'm always happy to help. I know this stuff can be kind of confusing. You'll have to really work on building the strength in your hand before the bar chord doesn't feel so difficult. Practice on an electric guitar first. It will be easier. You will thank me later. Okay, but in the meantime, don't worry too much about it. As long as you're practicing, find a great example of a song that uses lots of bar chords, maybe even one of each shape. That would be awesome. Okay, and then just have fun with it. Take your time, and you'll thank me later when your music becomes enriched and enlightened by the sound of the thirds, the majors, and the minors, and the extra notes on top. So you're not just playing a basic power chord version all the time in everything. It gets boring. And other musicians who have mastered bar chords and harder techniques will look at you and they'll think, yeah, it's okay, but everything he plays is power chords, right? So we don't want to be that kind of musician. We want to sometimes, if need be able to add in the major and minor tonality that makes music sound rich and beautiful and sad or happy and that kind of stuff, okay? So bar chords are huge. And also, there's really not that many open chords, and we don't want to limit ourselves to songs that use nothing but open chords. A lot of the greatest, most amazing songs out there have a bar chord or two. It's very common, okay? So don't neglect it. I know it's hard at first, but once you build the strength in your hand, you'll thank me, I promise, okay? All right, have fun, and I'll see you in the next one.